Hi, welcome back to the channel. My name is Rakesh Suryavanshi. Today we are going to discuss manage network security in Azure. So far in the previous module we have discussed how do you protect your application service such as an app services or the platform as a services in Azure from the security point of view. So we have secured our app services with the help of application gateway, VNet protection and other security aspect. And we have also looked at how do you write the secretless code as a developer using the services like managed service identity, key vaults, and referring the managed service identity into the key vault. Now we are going to look at the infrastructure aspect of the security. We'll check if you have the application hosted in infrastructure as a service in Azure, then how do you protect your services or how do you protect your application in that aspect? That will cover NSG, which is Network Security Group, and the App, Ser- app Service Groups, which is ASG. So we'll look at both of them. So today's agenda will be discussing the infrastructure as a security for your application using the NSG and ASGs. Let's start now. Just to simulate a scenario, I have an infrastructure as a service application configuration for one of my application in which I have a web server which is configured on a virtual machine. So my web application is basically configured on a virtual machine and I have a database server which is again hosted on a virtual machine. Both the virtual machine has currently got public IP address in it. So whenever the user comes and try to connect to my application, they try to reach out to the IP address or the domain name of my virtual machine. And the connection goes to the backend service from the web server and then data is returned back to the web server and it will return back to the server. This works fine in the normal scenario, but the things to be look at here is the web server and the infrastructure as server which are hosted on the public IP address. Hosting such a service on a public IP address with the critical application is going to be a very challenging job because it can be a very easy task for hackers to attack your application server or the database server. Now the question is how do you protect your application server or the web server from such kind of vulnerabilities? Please make a note here. At the moment, when we deploy the web server and the database server, there are two things. First, the application server and the web server basically hosted on the public IP address and there are no protection applied on it. Though from Azure side, there is a security service available which recommends you to apply the basic level of security or the kind of a level of security which is required to protect your resources in Azure. And if you have a virtual machine or the infrastructure as service resources created, then Azure always tries to send and log an information or the warnings that your infrastructure is not as per the standard and you should be updating the configuration of your virtual machines or the infrastructure as services sources. So anyways, you are going to get all those kind of alerts and the notification from the Microsoft Security Center. But you as a developer, how do you design your infrastructure in a way that even though if some attacker or hacker is trying to grab the or trying to send some attack on the web server or the database server, how do you protect that kind of vulnerabilities on your application? So that's what we are going to look at now. So let me show you the configuration of my application on the Azure portal. So this is my application configuration. I have SQL VM and Web VM, where SQL VM is where I'm going to host my database, and Web VM is where I'm going to host the website. And you can see at the moment it has got public IP address, and in the networking I do not have any security rule configured, so it's plain open machine. If I have the SQL server web server username and password using the public IP address, I should be able to RDP that. And same is the case with the SQL Server VM as well. It has got the public IP address and it hasn't got any NSGs. So if you look at the RDP, I am able to RDP to my web VM, and similarly if I go back, I am able to RDP to my SQL Server VM as well. So the very first thing you see here is the SQL Server is open. That means that even I should be able to connect to the SQL Server from my development machine as well. So I don't need to deploy the source code to connect to the SQL Server, which is really bad because it's again a security flaw. I can, if I have a user SQL Server username password somehow, then I am able to connect to the SQL Server without having any issues, which is again a security flaw. Basically, a good network security design should not expose your database server outside the world, right? That's the first thing. As you can see, I'm running my application, ASP.NET application, and connecting to the database, and I'm getting the record here. And if I add new one, let's say I had India, and then let's say, yeah, doesn't matter. If I add here, just to see if I just put the breakpoint, yeah, the record is added. Just verify that it's added into the same database. So if I go ahead and select start from country info, yeah, the so record is added here, which is again, this is not good as per the security, right? Because I can add a record and even from my local machine, though it is a different thing that I have the SQL Server username and password. But from the a good security point of view, if your username and password of your SQL Server is compromised, then you're gone, right? So that's not good. Now let me host the application onto the web server. So what I'll do here is I'll go ahead and deploy my application to the web server, publish, deploy the application onto the file folder. Application is deployed here on the bin directory. So what I'm going to do is now I'm going to copy this content and I'll copy and paste it into the web server. So this is my web server, and I have the IS created here. So what we are going to do is we are going to just copy the entire application here on the default directory. So I opened it like this particular default directory, and then now I'm trying to copy the content here. Did my application successfully onto the web server here. As you can see, the data is copied here uh, from my Visual Studio to the web server. This is the web server IP address I have copied here, and now if I'm browsing the IP address, uh, I'm able to launch the same application from the web server. So I have a web server now which is running on this IP address, and now it is connecting to the database server which is on the SQL Server IP address. It is connecting well. Now the problem we got here is both of them, web server and the application servers, are basically connected to public IP address and all the ports are open. So it's, even though this application is connecting on port 80, which is HTTP port, but there are some other ports are also open. So for example, RTP port is open, or SQL port is open, or any port which is provided by Windows Server or Windows machine, it is being open in both SQL Server and web server both. So that's not good, right, from the infrastructure and security point of view. So let's see what we do to mitigate this particular situation. So now my objective here is my web server should allow traffic only from the port 80, right? It should not allow any traffic apart from port 80. So how do I do that? We need to go ahead and create and configure the NSG for that. Okay, so how do we configure the NSG? You you'll find the network security rule or the NSG configuration here. But to configure the NSG, what we are going to do here is let's create a new resource called the network security group, and you will find it here. You create the network security group here, and let's give the name WebNSG, because we are going to create two of them. One is for the SQL and one is for the web port. Okay, so let's create the web one first, and then I'll walk you through how the NSG configuration look like. In this demonstration, we are looking at the multiple things like how do you deploy your application to the web server, how do you connect to the database, and all those basic things for developer. But also we are looking at some of the infrastructure related things which is important to know, like in a network rule configuration. So I have created NSG right now. This NSG at the moment is not been attached to any network resources in Azure. Now, if you see the NSG definition, it has got the inbound rule and outbound rule. What do we mean by the inbound rule? The inbound rule is for the incoming traffic, and the outbound rule is basically for the outgoing traffic, right? So any incoming traffic which is coming to the network where this particular NSG is configured or attached, that's where these rules are going to be applicable. So let's say the default NSG rule says the priority is, so the very first column priority, it defines the order in which the rule is going to be invoked. So lower the priority, the execution of the rule is going to be first. So let's say I have a priority 100, then and then priority 65,000, then basically the 100 will be executed first, and the precedence of the 100, priority order 100 will be first, and then the priority order of 65,000. Here you can see the NSG can be attached to either the NIC card. So if you want to attach NSG to a specific virtual machine, then you can attach this particular NIC to virtual machine directly. Or if you want to attach the NSG onto the subnet, instead of targeting a specific resource, like a specific network interface card on a virtual machine, if you want to configure the NSG on the entire subnet, for example, if a subnet has web subnet has got multiple web subnet has got a let's say availability set which has got number of virtual machines, and if you want to target all the available virtual machines, then instead of going and applying the NSG rules on the network security group, what we should be doing is we should be applying the NSG rule on the subnet, so that any virtual machine which has been created within that particular subnet, even though if it is in the availability set, then those resources or the virtual machines will be protected with this particular rule, right? So even though in advance in future, if though there are some additional resources going to be created, then you are protected with these rules. You don't need to go manually add the network interfaces to this network security group, right? This is where you should do. So let me go ahead and attach the network security group to my subnet. So I have selected the virtual network, and then once I selected the virtual network, I have the listed subnet available within that particular virtual network. So as this particular NSG we have created for web subnet, so let's do the web subnet for now. Select the web. I have selected the web subnet. It might take a while to reflect this particular thing. So basically, this rules means that allow VNet inbound. So any traffic within the VNet is going to be allowed. Any traffic within the VNet in via the load balancer is going to be allowed, right? This is what it means. took a while to reflect the NSG rules in place, and now you can see my web application is not working because as soon as we applied the NSG rule on the web application or my web server, what we are saying is no traffic is going to be allowed on the on that particular subnet, even not even on the port 80, right? And that's the reason, as you can see, my web application is not opening right now. It is taking so much of time, and I'm sure it is going to be blocked because of the NSG rule which we have configured. So this is what we are saying here. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing on the web server, on the database server as well. So what we are going to do here is we are going to create another NSG. Meanwhile, the other one is reflecting. So let's create the NSG network security group for the SQL server as well. So let's say NSG SQL. This is what we are going to call, and let's create that. So this will also have the default configuration with the default rule set, which is any traffic within the VNet allow, any traffic within the net via the load balancer is allowed, rest of them are denied. So any incoming traffic to this particular network where this NSG is attached, the traffic is going to be disallowed. So let's go ahead and associate the NSG rule onto the subnet. Let me show you this time associating the uh, energy rule on the network interface card. So as you can see, I have selected the network interface card associate, and the list of network interface card available in this particular resource group is available to me on this region, now 3 row region, right? So whichever region you have selected your energy, so in within that particular region you will have all the resources listed here. So I just got 2 resources here, so that's why it is mm, showing me these 2 resources. So let me select this resource, which is a SQL server. So we have seen 2 scenarios wherein NSG we have attached to the network interface, NSG we have attached to the subnet. So now, even though if my application would be connected, I will not be able to connect to the database, right? This is what I'm expecting because the database is currently blocked. So, and as you can see, the application is also not opening. So now to enable the application has started working back, what we are going to do now, as we know that our web service is expected to, you know, receive the traffic on the port 80. So let's enable the port 80 in this case. So what I'm going to do now here is I'll go to the not SQL, basically I need to go to the web NSG, and inside the web NSG I need to create an add rule, and then I need to select the source IP address range from where I need to allow, and then the target IP address range. So the good thing Microsoft Azure has provided is they have provided the sources in service tag. So service tag is really interesting things which you can use. So basically Microsoft Azure has provided the list of service tags which you can use to configure your NSG rules. Once you choose the service tag, it has a list of different services which you want to associate for your service, to, to restrict your traffic, either to allow or deny. So for example, I've chosen the service tag is in internet. So any traffic which is coming from internet from any port, I want to choose the destination as in uh, network, for example, in this particular virtual network. And then on the virtual network I'll say port 80, and then give it a name called the web port to allow web app instead, app allow. Okay, this is what the naming convention we are using it here, and the priority I'll say 1100 instead of 11. So here we are saying that any traffic which is coming from the internet to this particular virtual network, let's allow the port, allow the traffic if it is coming from the port 80, right? Let's see, this is the rule we have configured, and now hopefully it should work. It might take a while, so let's wait the NSG to reflect. Meanwhile, we'll also go to the SQL NSG, because even though application is going to be work fine, the SQL NSG is going to block the traffic to connect to the SQL server. So what we are going to do now, we want to connect our traffic from the, not from the internet, but we want to connect it from this time from the virtual network, right? So within this virtual network, we wanted to connect traffic from the network to network, and in this case we will say 1433. So if the traffic is coming from this network on the same where this particular uh, energy is associated, then, and if it is coming to port uh, 1443 and the destination is also on the same network, then allow the traffic here. SQL allow, this is what we will say, and we'll say 1100 as well. Okay, so by adding this rule, what we are making sure that even though the traffic is coming from internet or via the port 143, it's not going to allow that particular traffic. So we are saying that only allow traffic if it is coming from the within the virtual network, right? So earlier I've shown you that I was able to connect to the SQL server even from my local Visual Studio. I think applying the rules like this, I won't be able to connect the SQL server even from my virtual machine, even though I have the SQL server username and password, I have the public IP address or and things like that. So in that case, I will not be able to connect, because SQL NSG rules or this particular NSG rule is plugging me to connect to the SQL server, right? Let's see that. As you can see, my web application is up and running because my web NSG is enabled right now. Web NSG is working fine, so I'm allowing the traffic to route from port 80 on this IP address on this particular subnet on this virtual network with the help of NSG, and that's the reason I'm able to connect to the website. Earlier I was not able to connect, so it means my NSG is working fine the way it should be. It is expected to. Now I'm getting the error because the SQL server, remember when we added the SQL server rule in the NSG, we were able to disconnect, we were able to block, we were blocking the traffic to the SQL server, though later on we have added the SQL server allow traffic to port 1433, but to get the reflection of that particular energy rule, it might take a while. So I'll come back to you once the energy reflection is in place. Okay. And as you can see, our application is working fine, and I'm able to connect to the application. And let's test that if I'm able to create the data on the database. Let's create one DC. So hopefully, yeah, this is working. So with the help of different NSG rules we have selected, we have seen that we are able to create or we are able to demonstrate how do you protect your infrastructure with the help of network security groups. Now, one and last thing about the network security group or the infrastructure security, what you can do here is you can apply the network security not only to the NSG, but you can apply the ASC rules as well. For example, I can go ahead and create the ASC rules. So let me go ahead and do that. Just a moment. So I'll go to the NSG rule. So to create the application security group, what do we need to do here is we need to create a application group security group like this. Let's go ahead and create one. ASG demo 0. I'll pause the video while it is creating. Create ASG, the application security group is created. Now you can go ahead and configure the application security group from here. Like for example, I have the application security group, and if you read the warning carefully, show only application security group in the same region as your network interface is there, right? So I've created the application security group right here in this section. So this is again the advanced feature, which is the advanced level of the network security. So this is what you can use for your application to protect. Now this is the configuration we have done. Now let's test that if I am able to connect to my database. So if I am going to disconnect this and now try to connect to the remote desktop, I should not be able to connect it because we have not exposed the RDP port, similar for the case of the SQL Server. And you'll see I'll get an error. Yeah, this is what I'm getting, the error that you are not able to connect because your RDP port is not exposed. Now I'll go back to the Visual Studio and I'll try to run the application, and then I'll show you how I'm not able to connect to the SQL Server. That is, you can see while on the SQL connection port, I'm getting the error, which means I'm not able to connect to the SQL Server. And you can see this is what the error I'm getting it here, which proves that I'm not able to connect to the SQL Server. Whereas if I run the application on my local on the web server which has been deployed on this particular IP address, I'm still able to connect uh, to the application, right? And this is what we wanted. So far we have seen that how do you protect your application from the infrastructure point of view by use of NSG and ASG. How do you use the application, how do you deploy the application on the web server, how do you protect your application with the help of different NSG rules by allowing any selected ports such as an SQL Server port or port, HTTPS port or HTTP port, right? And just the purposefully port is going to be allowed so that your application is secure. I hope you've learned how do you configure the network level security for your infrastructure as a sources in Azure. If you like it, please subscribe it and give it a thumbs up. Thanks for watching it.